Welcome to Lean Into Leadership, where we lead the conversation about anything and everything leadership related. On today's episode, Yasas Vithanage joins the show. Hey everybody, it's Brandon Skiles, and welcome to episode 6 of Lean Into Leadership. We got a great one planned for you today. We're going to dive deep into multiple leadership concepts about leadership in living and learning communities, student leadership development, and also leading through change, which is super important. Now, real quick to kind of meet our special guest, Yasas. So Yasas currently serves as an assistant director for residence life, holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, which is super dope. I totally forgot about that. It's awesome. And a master's degree focused on counseling and higher educational leadership. And you're currently working on your doc program too, right? That's awesome. What is that in?
Educational leadership as well, but emphasis on educational technology.
Awesome. That's super cool. Kind of fusing both of those passions together. I love that. You have a passion for working with students and kind of developing those leadership traits and qualities in students and also staff members. And some big news of recently, you've recently been named the president of ACPA, which is the American College Personnel Association of Michigan president. So congratulations on that. It's exciting.
Thank you. It's only a chapter, but it's a big part of what I'm passionate about is to get people to get involved in professional development.
That's awesome. Well, we're super pumped to have you on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here, so thanks for being here. So before we jump into content, we'd love to always ask our guests this question here is to share a little bit more about who you are with our audience, what you do, and kind of why you do it, if you don't mind.
So once again, Yasas Vithanage, he and his as you say that, I'm completely blanking on who I am as a person. But so I came here to the States from Sri Lanka. So I'm an international student here. Came to do aerospace engineering because, what's the coolest thing you could do is just build rockets. But I joke about this all the time. I would love to go to Mars on a one-way ticket and just, build Mars. But that's why I came here, to build rockets. And then what I realized when I was going through that, it was super cool. I mean, honestly, how cool is it to, work with supersonic jets? Right. And I did that in undergrad. But what I realized is as I was becoming a more mature person and working in residence life is that engineers, the engineering firms I was interning at, they didn't really have and we call them soft skills, but the empathy and the care for other humans that didn't and we've talked offline about toxic culture and stuff like that. And what I wanted to do was change how the new generation of engineers would treat people when they came to the space, right? And it's going to take time and all that, but I saw a really big opportunity because I worked with a lot of students on my floor as an RA, and so I took this path I want to change this. I want to do this. I was frustrated. And one of my mentors in my leadership office was like, you could do this as a career, and they showed me to student affairs, and so I went through that program, worked with housing, worked with anti-bias and hate work on that campus as a grad student, graduated, so I went to undergrad at Wichita State University, go Shockers, then I started a job at USF Florida, so University of South Florida, and was a hall director there, working with anti-hate bias there as well, working with the engineering program and students like that, worked at Stetson University, Go Hatters, for a couple of years, and then came up here, and now working as assistant director. So this huge path, I tell my parents this is that, we're from Asian countries, and there's this stereotype, your parents really want to be lawyers, engineers, things like that. And I was like, hey, parents, I became an engineer, but that's not where I wanted to go. Would you support me in this? And they're really supportive of it. They don't understand what I do.
Right.
And I try to tell them all the time, but it's just interesting. I reflect on it quite often. Life can take you in many paths, and this is where I'm now. So got to meet Brandon at a couple of our events, and now we're friends and doing this.
We're doing the show.
Doing the show.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with our audience. So first big question for you is, when and how did you find your passion for leadership and working with students?
So in high school, most of y'all probably watched Harry Potter,
Mm-hmm.
prefects,
Mm-hmm.
the concept from there, but that's a big thing in the British system. So the school I went to, and most of education in Sri Lanka, we have prefects who are student leaders. They're usually the juniors, seniors of high school. And I got involved. I really was interested in because I thought it was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that we got to wear blazers and ties. I thought that was the coolest thing. But honestly, I had that was a point where I learned that people have a lot to give,
Mm-hmm.
but if they're not brought together in a space to do that well, they might just fizzle out and they might go do something that they regret. And I had a lot of friends who resented me from being a prefect, but from doing that, I was able, like, when I came back to them with all these skills, you just learn stuff. They don't take you through leadership classes, but you
Mm-hmm.
learn, how to take care of people, and we organize a lot of assemblies,
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff. But when I go to my friend's place and they're like really struggling with classes, I have the skills because I became a leader
Mm-hmm.
to help them organize their work and help them get through classes, and that really showed me value in that, because it wasn't just like make an assembly, get people in lines in high school, yell at some small kids like that. That's usually what, like, people stereotype the prefect role to be. But I learned a lot of how to organize people, help them organize themselves, and then, like, let them do it on their own. When I was younger, I would do it for them, and as I'm older now, like, I can help them give these skills,
Mm-hmm.
and then they could do it on their own. That's so much more valuable,
Right.
and more satisfying for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it started, and I didn't really know what, like, leadership meant,
Right.
until, honestly, I became a resident assistant,
Mm.
and there they taught so much skills. I mean, you probably know your RA who, like, it needs to know everything about the university and everything going on, and so that was a place where they taught me a lot about myself, starting with myself and why I wanted to do things for others. And so that's where it started, and then it kind of evolved from there. And then now, as I am a professional, leading other professionals, it's evolved into something of how do you make other people feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to lead them. If they feel valued, they'll show where they want to go, and then they'll lead themselves. So it's kind of evolved, but it really started there. It just really started with, I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be, I wanted to have the nice blazer and tie. I went to a private school, so
Okay.
that was the cool thing to do.
Right.
That's the only way you could look different. You could have a tie instead of and a blazer instead of just the T-shirt that we usually wear. So that's where it started, and now it's kind of evolved over the years. So.
I love that. Like, it's cool too that you can kind of pinpoint, like, parts of it, and it's probably come together as you've reflected on those things, and, like, where you are now versus where you were when you were younger. I always think that's really interesting, because I feel like some people know that moment, and some people it's a little bit more difficult to find, which is totally fine and normal. Because I think so many things go into that moment when you're like, man, I do have the opportunity. I realize I am a leader and who I am. So thanks for sharing that. It's a really cool story. What type of leadership programming goes on in living and learning communities typically?
Well, I did have a question about this. Are you asking about the living learning communities, like the little pods, or like the communities in general?
I mean, we could go both if you
Yeah.
want. Yeah, if you have answers for both of those.
Yeah, so for the listeners who don't know, so we have the communities in residence life. So you have your buildings, your floors. Some buildings and floors have living learning communities. So, I mean, Brandon knows this. We have the Leadership Advancement Scholars, which is, overseen by the Leadership Institute here. And there's, HPRC, which is Health Profession Students Program. There's the business. There's like, I think, 10. I can't remember all of them top of my head, but those are little pockets of communities which are run by us and a partner office, and they're usually skills or program based. So it could be like health professionals, leadership, like that. And so what usually happens, I mean, I can talk about LAS. They're really focused on leadership development, right? And then we can go into that for sure. But most other communities, it's really focused on how do you build leadership or knowledge and how to care for people in that community, right? So I work heavily in my community, the health professions space, and the CERC, what is it called? Science and Engineering, the music community as well. And so they're really focused on what opportunities will make you advance in your your career, right? What are the things you need to be better in your career, but how do you work with people in your career? And that's the leadership part that they're focused on. And I think that's really interesting, because how do you work with, what kind of common language do you need to have? How do you motivate people in that space? Because a person who's an engineer, we're not going to talk the same as someone who's in social sciences, right? Because we have different languages. And so like literally like kind of things we care about too, right? So they really focus on that industry, and so that's really cool. And they challenge, what I mentioned before, the toxic culture of that industry. Like, how can we make it better? How can we make it more diverse in thought and being? So that happens in our spaces for sure. And then the larger community, right? We have resident assistants, inclusion assistants, and community council advisors, and the residence hall, staff and desk assistants and all. We're really focused on what are those larger skills, right? And talk in between those communities, right? So like you could be really engrossed in the leadership advancement scholars and not really have the skills to talk to anyone who's outside that program, right? So our job in residence life is to connect you between those spaces. What are the skills you need? Generally, being more empathetic is a great thing, right? And so we focus on that. Generally, knowing more about yourself and where to go for your academic success is important. So we focus on those kinds of things. We have like 4 learning goals in our. We have a curriculum ourselves that focuses on like people's overall development, and so building that through that leadership, like challenging them and then having them work through conflict. That's all leadership skill that happens inside the larger community. So we have the small, like really interesting communities, and we call them living learning communities, LLCs. And then we have the larger building and the area, which is south, east, towers. So there's like all these different layers of leaderships happening throughout the whole community.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You find like students in those living learning communities, at least in your area where you're stationed, do they branch out often, or do you maybe have to challenge them a little bit to kind of reach out into maybe some of those, meeting other students and finding those community events, or do they kind of like stick to where they're at, or is it often, do they kind of go in through different residence colleges or different floors and things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we usually see is if they had a really good safari or orientation experience and they learn more about people in different spaces, they're often going to go to those spaces. So they love hanging on their community because it's very comfortable. It's built for them. It's they have classrooms in East. There are some floors that have classrooms on their floor, so that's where sometimes they have classes there. They have study spaces specific, and it's very easy to get into that. But we find if they know people from Safari or Impact or Orientation, and other buildings, they'll go find them, and then that's how that experience goes. So, and not to say that they won't have classes with people in different buildings, right? So that helps too. But sometimes we do have to challenge them, right? Because they might. We've all done this. When it gets comfortable, it's easy to just stay there. And so same thing with your room. You might get very comfortable in there, and so you might not want to come out, or maybe you get comfortable with just a couple group of people, and then you all tend to have the same mannerisms and thoughts, and you just like get into it. But then you go to this program that you get challenged to go to, or it just shows up at your doorstep like, oh man, this is great, maybe I'll try something different. So sometimes our job is just to provide an opportunity that's just not the same. And like, we love those experiences. We crave different experiences, so it's just providing those new things. So we do challenge them. I think it does help them a lot, and we do things in the residence hall. At least like we have big areas, so at least I'll talk for East. Like we have 6 buildings, and we have chunks of it. So there are 3 buildings called FEW, so Fabiano, Emmons, and Wolt. Then SHC, Sachs, Herrig, Chelani, Halls. They work together. They have hall council, so they have leadership opportunities there in the residence hall. But they really work on connecting between buildings. So these 3 buildings are really focused on, let's get everybody together and do something that's different. So we do provide that. I think that brings a lot of value.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else, but
No.
we're going rambling
Yeah.
right here.
No, that was awesome. And I want to stress too, like for the audience, definitely if you're part of a residential college program or a scholarship program in a living learning community, those are really great opportunities. But even if you're not, there's definitely ways, again, to meet other students, get involved, and find those opportunities, as Yas has kind of mentioned, through residence life and just getting connected on campus. And it's a really, really cool experience. I mean, speaking from my experience, being in the residence halls, I definitely miss some of that because again, just the amount of people you get to meet, how much you learn, the community and support systems you get to build, and that staff team over, especially in East, is super awesome. So just definitely a way to get to meet people,
Yeah, and just a jumping off point, right? Like you could be in that community, even if you're not in a living learning community. It's a comfortable place to come back, but it's not always the place you want to be, right? So start there and push it and see where it goes. And if it's like not for you, then you try something different.
Mm-hmm.
So what I enjoy is when I see students who try something different,
right?
Even if they don't like it, at least then they know they didn't like it, you know. And then the what if isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
What if I didn't like the skateboarding club?
Right.
Great, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know. What if I don't like the wrestling club? Fantastic. What if you love the ramen eating club? I don't know if they have one.
They probably do. If they don't, we can start it, right? I don't know.
I mean, I love the ramen eating club.
We should start it.
I have it in my own house.
Yeah,
so
there you go. But no, I'm glad you mentioned that because we've talked about that a lot, especially on our previous episodes on this show, about that idea of building self-awareness by getting involved, trying new things. And again, too, like you mentioned, even if you don't like something, well, now you know you maybe don't like it, right? And that's a plus, too. It's all about how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows, maybe you do go to an event, don't really like it, but you meet someone who can help you out along the way or find a mentor. You never really know unless you push yourself. And again, and we know that can be sometimes a little bit intimidating and stuff, but it's definitely worth it. And everyone's at their own different level, right? Maybe it's trying one thing, maybe for a little bit. Maybe it's trying a couple new things, whatever may work for you. But it's definitely is valuable and a great way to even hopefully find your passion in what you want to do.
I think some students get paralyzed by thinking I need to be involved in every single thing.
Right.
And really it's about finding that one thing.
Yeah.
And I tell this to students, I tell to my staff, I tell myself, is that just find one thing and do it 100%.
Right.
And then, at that 100% is only for a week. Great. Right. There's sometimes consequences that's like leaving something in the middle of it, but you know that you gave 100% for that instead of spending all your energy in different places. So it's not a checklist. Like you don't need to have this trophy cabinet of places that you've been to or were involved in, but that one big trophy, like what did you do with this time that you have? 4 or 5 years, maybe, some people are done in 2. So what are you going to do with this little time you have here?
Love that. So how can students get involved in leadership roles in residence life specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it a little bit, right? We talked about resident assistants. We also have inclusion assistants and community council advisors. So those are the staff that live on the floor, and I'll get into it a little bit, but don't discount the desk assistants that we have. They go through a lot of training, leadership work as well, and then just being involved in the hall council. So I'll get through it in a minute. But let's talk about the RAs that we might know we're very familiar with, right? They oversee the floors. They build community programs, have fun. They're also responsible for safety, and so are the inclusion assistants and CCAs, community council advisors. The inclusion assistants were really focused on developing community and identity development. It's like really questioning how do we feel like we belong. And their job is not to, and I oversee the inclusion assistants, so I'm passionate about this. Their job is not to be the person who's telling you this is not inclusive, this is not.
Right.
It's like, why? Who are you? Why do we do these things? So they're really questioners in that sense. And the community council advisors, they're students who make sure the larger community has a say in this, how they want to have the community. So they help run the councils, which we'll get to as well. I mean, what a great opportunity, and I started there too. So when I came to the States, that was one of the first places I went to was. I went to the hall council and I helped organize stuff. And I just went to some programs. Sometimes I helped with stuff, and that really opened my eyes to some of these opportunities. For those 3 positions, RA, inclusion assistant, and community council advisors, we have a application process that usually starts in December.
Okay.
Remember November, December, and then we interview people in February. it's like a big week of interviewing.
Mhm.
And I want to be clear, it's not a super professional like you have to have a suit and tie. It's not all
Right.
stakes. It's really about understanding who you are as a leader,
Uh-huh.
how you problem solve, right? Like, and no one's gonna know exactly how to do exactly everything,
Mhm.
but how would you make sound judgment? And that's what we want, because there's a lot of safety that it goes into those roles. How
Right.
to keep people safe, make sure
Mhm.
they're making safe choices. So that's a lot of what the interviews are going to be like. How would you help a student? How would you prioritize these things so that
Mhm.
you are successful in your role, but also in academics? Like a lot of questions like that. So that's a group of positions there, and then you have I mentioned the desk assistants. They're in every hall. Just crack my knuckles. Sorry
No, yeah.
about that. Oh yeah, desk assistants. They're in every hall, and they go through extensive training as well, because part of it is, you're sitting at the desk, yes, right, but people have questions.
Right.
How do you treat people when they come to the desk? How do you help them solve problems? Because when you might know this, right? You go to any desk, you're like, I have a billion questions. I have
Right.
this one very niche thing. I don't know what to do. Help me.
Mhm.
And they're coming to you in not always in crisis, but
Right.
in curiosity and questioning, and how do you help them? The desk assistants also, they get the crisis calls too. So the way that our duty calls work out here is, if you have an emergency, you call the front desk, and the front desk decides which RA to call, which we would call them paraprofessionals. The paraprofessionals call 911. They call the hall director. So they also we train them. So one, right, it's not traumatic. You're not always just dealing with these negative crises,
Right.
but also how do you help someone who is needing help and is hurt. So you get a lot of that. The empathy in that is such a skill that we want to market for sure.
Sure.
It's really valuable. And at the end of the day, you get to do a lot of your homework at the desk too. So
Yeah.
it's like you get to this leadership stuff, and you get to get money, and
Be
you get
productive,
to be
right?
productive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a kind of a chill job, but really we do train them really well.
That's awesome.
And then the hall council, they're not paid positions, but they, I mentioned the community council advisors. They help organize it. They get it running every year. They, train the students who are the leaders, the e-board, the executive board, and what they do is they solicit ideas from the community. What do you want to do? What do you want? How do you want to engage in the community? Do we want to do a big block party, or do we want to do a Earth Day activity where we do in service? So, and you as a student have a lot of say in that. You can go, you can help organize it, and you can just have fun there. Usually have one of the biggest programs in the buildings because of the hall council.
That's cool.
And then lastly, the hall council bleeds into RHA. I think it's, I gotta remember the acronym, Residence Hall
Association, maybe?
No, it's not association. It's I'll say association for now, but it's not that word. But it's RHA. You might hear better that way. But they're like the overseeing body of hall councils, so they get all the hall councils together. One, they do like residence hall wide programming, but also they help. Sometimes there are things they petition for, like we want to the community feel safer. Let's help this place. Let's make a policy or help write this proposal, because all communities are feeling like this.
Right.
They don't do a lot of that, but sometimes they do. But they just, how can I put this? They make sure that all buildings feel connected.
Okay.
So each council in the hall makes sure the buildings feel safe or connected, and then the RHA makes sure the entire 5,000 students feel connected. So it's a big ask as well.
Yeah.
So it's all that. So they're all those, and we talked about living learning communities. Some of them have leadership roles in them too. I can tell for sure. The health professions, residential college, they have peer advisors. They also have their own governing body in there to make sure that the community feels like they have a say in how the community is run too. So leadership is not just like a paid position or this one thing. Like, you can be a leader in all these spaces, but here are some ways that you can start that journey.
That's awesome. I didn't even know about some of the hall council kind of thing. I didn't realize that was a part of that process until really just now. And I've heard too from a lot of students and some personal friends or people I know that were in some of those roles, maybe like a resident assistant or an inclusion assistant. They absolutely love that experience. And kind of looking back on it, I kind of maybe wish I would have maybe thought about doing that maybe when I was a bit younger in my undergraduate time at CMU. But yeah, no, again, that's just a great way to get involved and, again, like help students learn those soft skills or those human skills we talked about a little bit earlier too. But yeah, super cool. It looks like there's way more involvement than I even knew about. So tons of great ways to get involved and make an impact on your community too, which is awesome. And it's an experience that you don't always necessarily get. So it's a great way to kind of take advantage of that. Kind of moving forward here. So, communication is essential really in anything, but especially effective leadership. How can leaders work on effective communication tactics to maybe improve those skills?
Yeah. I mean, Brandon's been at the orientation sessions I've done where I tell the new students coming in, check your email, check your email. And I want to be clear, right? You're not expected to be available 100% of the time, like 24/7, 365. That's impossible.
Right.
I think when people say better communication is like when you have the opportunity to share something that's important to other people, you should share it in a timely manner. And talking about leadership, right? Usually we're working with a lot of people, or even like a couple people, right? You might be in a team, you might be, and this could be relevant to class. Everyone's depending on each other. Communication helps us do is make sure that we're all able to work together and not hurt each other as well. I mean, how many times have you been in a team, a group project where like no one's talking to you, right? Like you're reaching out like, when are we gonna meet up? When are we gonna do this? And it's like crickets, right?
Too many times,
right? But and that carries over your entire life, right? How do you talk to people? How do you get them motivated? But back to what we're saying, like you don't have to be available 24/7, but think about when you have class, or usually if it's like I used to go to class at 8:00 because I'm an early riser, but people are not like that. But if your class is at like starting at 11 to 6 is when your classes are, usually around then, like most of the day you should be looking at your emails, checking them, make sure that people don't need you, or if you need something, to expect it, to send an email, to text back, to call back. Really important, like in residence life, I say is like a text is something that can be answered at any time, right? Like it's not an urgent issue. A call is an emergency. I think we're a part of our generation where like we don't call unless it's like a dire need, which
Super
for me
important.
in residence life, like we're dealing with emergencies, like call me if it's an emergency, but text me. I'm always available in text. I got an Apple Watch. I got my headphones that tell me like someone's messaged me, so I know stuff's coming in. An email is something that's super detailed, right? So if you need I have a group project, and these are the requirements of the group project. Probably better to send that through email than text. But once you get everyone's numbers, setting up a time to meet might be good over the text. And if someone doesn't show up for this time, calling them might be the right thing. I think just knowing like the priority of these kinds of communications mediums is important, because I'll get students who are like, I called your office at 5:30. I'm not here at 5:30, right? But if you send me an email, or you call, the right person, we have an on-call structure, call the right person. Someone can get to you if it's an emergency.
Right.
But if it's not an emergency, email me. You might be able to articulate yourself better, or be like, there's a lot of words I want to say, but I would like to meet in person.
Right.
Even that could be an email. And usually, even your professors would be like that. Like, we have office hours, come to this time, or they'll ask you questions about, do you have any details about your paper, or like your roommates might ask you something. High detail stuff needs to be in emails, and I think a lot of students get in this habit of not checking their email, and that people use it.
Right.
If you're not used to using it now, get used to using it like a couple of times more throughout the week, and then build yourself up to it, because it's a lot of words. People love to talk a lot on emails. But yeah, if you use those in that way, like a call is an emergency, if you're not going to show up to a meeting, or you're going to be late, a text or a call to let people know that, hey, I'm on the way, don't worry about me. Or you can get started like, I'm so sorry. that makes a big difference.
For sure.
Or like, you know, you don't always. I'm trying to challenge like being early is on time. That can't always be the case, right? And then you might just get too stressed about stuff.
Yeah.
But leaving enough time to get from one place to another. I used to do this where it was like I'll be back to back, like 9 to 10 is one meeting or like a class, and then at 10 o'clock I have to be all the way across campus to be at another space. That's not. I've failed the other people that are expecting me, right? So like, hey, like I can come around this time. Like it's gonna take me 5 minutes to get to this place. Like is that okay? Or can we reschedule? Like just talking about what your needs are, but like letting people know, because not letting them have assumptions on like, hey, they're not here. Do they not care? You don't want that,
right?
But if you tell them, hey, I'm here, like I'm showing up. I just need 5 minutes to walk across campus. That makes a big difference.
For sure.
But yeah, but don't email. Oh man, I can get on this, but I get on. I've got a lot of emails from students and staff, like even professionals. They'll email me at 10 o'clock when we have a meeting, like I'm on my way.
Right.
It's like, I can't. I didn't see that. But sometimes we don't have everyone's numbers, right?
For sure.
I also have to hold that. It's like like sometimes we might not be looking at our stuff at the right time. Anyway, I rambled on that, but
no, it's good.
I want to say the tips are, you know, when you're going to class and you're ready for your day, check your email, 2-3 times a day. I check it constantly because I'm a professional, but your text messages, you're always looking at it anyway.
Right.
Don't leave people on read.
Yeah.
Like I can't talk to you right now. I'm in a class. Can't talk to you right now. I'm talking to my mom. I'll call. Can I text you back in 5 minutes? That's great. Honestly, the biggest tip I've got is like I'll read a text. I'll say, can I text you back in 5 minutes? And I'll go back out and I'll mark it as unread so that the notification will still be on my phone, because that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So I'll go back into it. And then the same thing with calls is like, I can't pick up the phone right now, but we have voicemail for a reason. But you can send them a text message like, I can't pick up right now. Can I call you back in whatever time?
Right.
And setting those clear times so that people are not making assumptions, or you might miss a meeting or two, but at least they know that you knew that people were expecting you.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are good tips. I mean, I think using those technology can help.
Yeah.
But also some of those things I never thought about that either, like resetting your notification, because I'm definitely guilty of that at times. Sometimes I just don't respond, or I get so sidetracked, and it might be something small to you in the moment, but it may matter to someone else, right? And so it's just a simple response. So no, I think those are great tactics to help with effective communication. I think especially as maybe as you start to take on a leadership role or start leading in different teams and organizations, like you're gonna have more people that you're leading, right? That are not necessarily dependent on you, but maybe look to you for guidance, and that you need to maybe support and help along the way. And again, more people, there becomes more things that you have to worry about at times. So that those tactics are really, really crucial. Again, not just for personal needs, but also to impact your leadership. I think when it comes to like checking your email, setting different calendar, whatever effective tools work for you. Again, one person's thing may not work for another, but just even trying and experimenting with those things will definitely help out.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if you're in a group where you're not the leader, right? If you're part of a team, you're not the leader, that's still good leadership to say you're leading yourself, right?
Exactly.
If you're not the leader of a group, you're still leading yourself, and so you're leading yourself to say, here's this is what's going on. Like these are the things that people need to know. And people are going to remember that, right?
Right.
If people, you have a meeting with people and they're like, Yasas, he's always late, right? They're going to remember that. But if you can say, hey, I'm like 5 minutes away because I'm walking from campus. People remember that. Like they're still, like, Yasas is still coming. He's dedicated to this, but man, he's across the way. That you can change people's perceptions with that too. Like,
for sure.
It's not always your responsibility to do that, but if you're noticing this pattern and you can like interrupt it, that'd be cool too. Like, oh yeah, like he still wants to be here, but if something came up, that's fine. We can be flexible, and then he'll still show up and give 100% when he's here. That's okay.
Exactly, and I mean, life happens too. Things come up, and no, that's a really good point made too. It's like you're still showing your dedication, but you're also taking that accountability. Like, I realize I'm late. I apologize for doing this. Something came up. You don't always have to tell the exact reason either. I mean, if it's personal, right? But it's sharing that message to someone, because again, like Yasas was mentioning, it lets them know that you care, you're gonna be there, or if you can't make it, that, you know, it's still on your mind and
Yeah.
you're looking to find a new way. So those are great tactics, super important. And definitely, you know, hopefully for the viewership, some of those maybe hit and resonate a little bit. Next up, I think this is a common thing, and I think a worry point for just a lot of people in general, but how can students lead through conflict? And do you have any tips for that? Because I know that can be really difficult. And I know that question's kind of more, I guess, broad, and because, you know, it really depends on the environment, the context, and conflict. But I guess in general, are there any tips that maybe help someone maybe lead through conflict?
Yeah. Well, we got to throw this to you. What do you think conflict? What do you think conflict is?
I mean, I think maybe coming like through disagreement, within maybe different parties, different people, or maybe even I guess we can lens this through a team setting. You know, and maybe it's not even you're in the conflict, but maybe you have two people on your team that are disagreeing on something important. Maybe how can you lead through that? Because I think oftentimes too, conflict maybe, I don't think conflict's a bad thing either. I want to make that note as well, but sometimes conflict can lead into maybe some negative emotions or reactions. So maybe again, how to like take a step back as in that leadership role or in that leadership experience, and kind of come to a resolution. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I love that you said that. Conflict is normal. Like conflict is to expected. Like we have conflict with ourselves,
Right, all the time, yeah.
right? So this is an interesting topic because I just talked to this with my staff. We're doing this in our department, so don't think that just because you get a degree, multiple degrees, and you're working as a professional, like you're a master of conflict. Like I have staff members who are like twice my age, right? I'm almost 30, twice my age, that have no idea how to talk to people about, you know, their concerns or their conflicts. And then I have staff members who are, you know, half my age, they're not 15, but like, you know, just starting their career, emerging professional who have so many good skills. I'm like, oh my God, like,
Right.
You handle that really well. The way you articulated your concern made me want to care about it, right? So it's not a and just like leadership, right? Leading through conflict, by conflict in general, is a skill that we have to lean into. I think I see a lot of students, and myself included, that avoid conflict because it's uncomfortable.
For sure. Me too.
And we have a lot of roommate conflicts that come up from just like not talking about, hey, like your toenail clipping was there. Can you pick it up? Like you can just tell someone that, like, I don't like that. Can you pick it up? Or it's not even toenail clipping. It's like, can you make your bed every day? That makes me feel like this place is more comfortable. That's an easy ask. It's not like, you know, stop throwing spaghetti on the floor. Like it's honestly like it's so simple that we make this narrative in our head that's hard. So that's really hard. But to lead through conflict, specifically as a leader, right? We were talking before, you're leading yourself through many things, and then you're leading others as well. I think it's to recognize that you're heated about something, and that's okay. That's normal, right? We are passionate people. And like, what is really important right now? It's hard to do when you're in the moment, but
For sure.
if you recognize, right, as you're going through this, you've lived your life, like, I've gotten angry about this. We are in disagreement. Let's say we're in disagreement now. Like, Brandon, we're not seeing eye to eye. Can I take a second to like breathe? Or you don't even have to say that. Like, take a breath. Sometimes without oxygen, our brains just like get really hyped up. So take a breath. Like, okay. And this is also a great plug for the Institutional Transformative Dialogue. They have a great class on conflict resolution and stuff as well. But to be more curious about the other person,
Right.
And invite them to be curious about your side as well. So, hey, we're having a disagreement. Brandon and I have a disagreement. Okay, we're really dug in right here. Our heels are dug in. How can we get past this? But like, what would make this feel like we're moving forward? Okay, great. Can you help me understand? You said this. That's not what I'm seeing. Can you help me understand? Right? And then, you know, offering the both sides. Like, can I say what I feel about my topic? It's really hard to do. And I mean, I'm giving you these prompts. I think that's usually a great way to start. Like, even the way I'm saying it now, those words can make you feel calmer and like say things calmer. And so like, what the bleep 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 bleep?
Yeah.
Do you think you're doing? Like, that's not helping, because then
Right.
we get defensive. So invite them to be curious, because
Okay.
that prevents us from being as a defensive, right? You can't stop being defensive. But be curious in them and invite them to be curious in you.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not get, the way you want,
Right.
but you might be able to compromise on something,
Yeah.
right? There are things that, you shouldn't compromise on, right? Like, hey, we can't leave these doors unlocked because a stranger might come in. We can't. That's something you shouldn't compromise on.
Mm-hmm.
But like, hey, I lost my keys. Can you leave the door unlocked? And you're having a fight about that. Like, okay, I can't leave these doors open all night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel safe. But I can't leave. But you have to get in here because you lost your keys. Okay, one, you could go to your desk. Everyone, go to your desk and get yourself a new key. I've had so many students who've spent a whole year without a key, and then they tell me after they move out, like, I didn't have a key all year because I lost
what?
it. And I'm like, what? How'd you get inside? But one, that's an option. Like brainstorm with them. Like, that's another option. Or just text me or call me when you're here. It really helped me feel safe. That the doors are locked most of the time.
Yeah.
But when I'm here, I'm happy to have this door open for you. And that's like being curious and giving more, giving an option. Like sometimes when we are passionate about something, we lack the perspective, like that there's other options, right? Like, and that comes with time and skill. But even if you're the most skilled person, from someone from across the street and be like, try this, and you're like, oh, honestly, that's the best idea that we could have had. Like,
Right.
you think about famous inventors, like, they're usually like at this like really big conflict in their work, or like they're thinking about how to solve this problem. They're stuck, and they go on a walk on a beach, and then they see like a shell on the beach, and like, oh, that's the solution to the problem. Like,
Right.
the simplest thing, but it wasn't in like that moment. Like, they
Right.
had to step away and see a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important too. So just invite them to be curious, invite yourself to be curious about other people, and be willing to compromise.
Yeah.
Like, there are things, and we might be able to tell this to people you're having conflict with, like, this is my value and I can't step beyond that. Can you help me like solve this problem with not compromising my values? Like, help me help myself. I'm dug in here. I'm in conflict. How do I do this? And that's a really hard place to be. Like,
Yeah.
especially I'm talking about like roommate conflicts a lot, right? That's a private space. Like, that's your
Yeah.
safe place, and people like having conflict in there. It's really hard to be like, help me solve this in that like tone of voice when you feel like
Right, when
is
you're
my-
heated or you're kind of amped up.
This is my space. Like, why
Yeah.
do I have to compromise? It's like, take a breath, ask them, like, can we be curious together? Can we sit down?
Yeah.
Sometimes text is not the way to do it. 'Cause
No.
you can't.
You gotta do it in
Even with
person.
like all the emojis and gifs, like, you're not gonna get it right.
Yeah.
So sit down, ask, and sometimes it's asking for help. So you mentioned your leader and two other people, or like multiple people having conflict. Like, sit them down. Like, I'm gonna be the mediator. Let's sit in a circle. Let's talk this out. Be curious about each other. I mean, it's relevant because I did that with my team literally a couple of days ago. I'm not immune from being part of that conversation. Like, I was part of the conflict as well. Like, I was, one of the things that we were talking about was me. So it's like, I'm also the part of the problem, but I'm willing to solve it. So like, let's sit down.
Right.
Like, here's what I'm saying. This is what you're saying. Okay, so like, what would make the best out of this situation? And then let's come back to it. That's the other part, is like, you might agree to something now, and it might not be, it might land for now, but in a couple of weeks, a couple of days, like, oh man, I just thought about it. I slept on it. This one thing, it really bothers me. Can we talk about it again? And that's okay. And
Yeah.
like that, right? Like, that happens.
Right.
That happens.
Or the reverse, like, maybe it wasn't as deep as I thought it was. Just in the moment, I was having a rough time, or things kind of connected, and that thing sent me over the edge, right? Like,
Yeah, assume good intent too. Like,
Right.
right? Like, we're all trying to do the best that we want to. We might not all understand, but like, I'm assuming you have good intentions with this, but it's not landing. And then, like you said, like, it might not be a huge deal, but when you understand where someone's coming from, you're like, oh, so this is really important to you
right.
because of this one thing. So I can do this, and we'll both win. Like,
Exactly.
that's good.
Yeah.
All good.
Usually just kind of taking a step back from the situation if possible, and just, figuring it out. And I really like that idea of like showing curiosity, and then also inviting people to be curious in you too. I really like that message. I think that's really vital, and something like I don't think I always think about either, because like you said, and too, and there's so many ways people can, have opinions or ideas on one way, and one way is not always the best way. It might be work the best for you, but not for someone else. And like you just mentioned as well, or maybe you hear someone out and it is important to them, or you learn something new, or maybe you learn a new way of how to do something, and you walk away stronger and better as well from the situation, even though it could have, just stemmed from conflict, or a disagreement. So that's awesome. How do you infuse leadership development within your role as an assistant director in residence life, I guess, specifically, or maybe even as president of your chapter?
Yeah. Oh, president of my chapter. That's a difficult question because we're starting the chapter again. It's
kind
been
of revamping.
Revamping it. So
okay.
It's kind of all things at all the time.
Gotcha.
So it's a difficult place to be, but it's really interesting to say to people, right? Because you have a small group of people. Because it used to be a huge organization. We have a small group of people starting up again. Like, it's going to be a tough time.
Yeah.
It's not going to be everything we want it to be. But by the end of this year, after my tenure, what do we want it to look like?
Mm-hmm.
And like, they give ideas, and I want to make that true for them. And we'll talk it out. So a lot of the stuff I do in this chapter position, and students might feel like this, like, you might be starting a organization or trying to get the organization back up and running to some kind of place. Like, something's not going to be 100%, but you can launch it 40-50% of what it used to be, and be happy that we made some step forward. And so helping them feel like they're accomplishing something, they did something great with their time, and they built it for the next person. I'm fortunate that the way that our system works is that the president for the next year is working next to me. Like, so even though I'm running this year, I need to be very mindful of the next person coming in. Like, I can't build a system that like really prevents them from being a leader. Like, that's true for a lot of student orgs. Like, you'll be president maybe for 1 year, maybe treasurer for 1 year. You can't just turn everything upside down.
Right. Because it'll fall apart when you leave, right?
Exactly.
If you're the only one that knows things. Sorry.
Exactly.
But
and then if you're leaving, tell people that what you did, like how you thought about things, so that the next person picking it up, or if you're a part of that organization, to take that role on, like, okay, I understand, so that they don't feel like they're just thrown out to the wind. So that's also part of effective communication, right? Like, I'm leaving, here's all the stuff that I think is important, appreciate your time. Boom, easy. But as an assistant director, I'm leading professionals. I get to lead 5 amazing professionals, and I work closely with about 15 more. At least in my small team, we're really talking about their leadership in their communities, and how they're leading others. And so we talked about different perspectives. They all have different perspectives of how to do stuff, and I want to foster that, because there might be so many similar things, but there are things as those whys, like, why do you do this one process this way? How do you why do you talk to the student this way? Conflict management, and then also, like, with identity, we have so many different people with different different backgrounds and experiences. In our team, but also the students we talk to are all different. So sometimes we just talk about like how we navigated the situation, so that we can understand some different perspectives. Specifically, we talk about identity a lot because it matters. Where you're from, unfortunately, the color of your skin, how you identify. It makes a big difference because our realities are different. You can't just have a cookie cutter way of talking to people. So we do a lot of like. So you work with this. We don't go into everyone's personal lives, but like we work with a student. They had this conflict. I noticed that because this part of themselves is really important to them. They showed up in this way, and so I tried to navigate it this way, and so we all become better that way. And then me as a leader of professionals, I still need to make East feel like East. So we have like 6 buildings, but it's still East. So when a student comes in here, they need to feel like the entire community is their home. Even though they have one building, they have a dining hall that's communal. They have like study spaces. They have lounges that are communal. What is their experience when they're here? So it's like all that, and then making sure that when they interact with each one of us, that they still feel like they belong. And so a lot of what I'm doing is, how do we make students feel like they belong? it's not perfect,
Right.
but we talk about it a lot and just make sure
Yeah.
that the students get the most out of what they want
For sure.
in college. And sometimes it's the hardest parts of their life, right?
Yeah.
We see a lot of students going through the hardest parts of their life. It's sometimes the best part of their lives, and we want to celebrate that too. So it's, as a leader, what I'm doing is connecting all those dots. I'm like, here's your why. I talk to my staff like, what is your why? And they'll tell me. And then when they have these wins in their work or challenges in their work, I'll tell them, this really connects to something you're passionate about. You told me about this.
Right.
So I want to make this better for you because this is really important to you. So let's work on it. So we brainstorm, we work it out, we talk to each other. And we make sure that the students really are at the center of it.
Yeah.
And then obviously like making sure that my staff is, healthy and have the capacity to do it. So a lot of coaching them how to take breaks, like take a day off, things like that. But I don't get to hang out with a lot of students or student staff just because of my level. But I get to oversee the inclusion system program, and that's really cool because we talk a lot about like identity development because that's a lot of their role.
Yeah.
But we're trying to really look at how students show up when they're frustrated, when they're transitioning to college, like their whole journey. That's what they're really focused on. Like identity makes a big difference in that. Like you're first time college student and your parents have never been to college, right? We call that a first generation student. When you're in orientation, that's scary, right?
Yeah.
No one knows what's going on.
Exactly.
And then they come to college, you work through this system, and you like realize, I don't know where all the answers are. I'm scared. Or like, you know what? I found my niche thing and that's the one thing I'm going to do. Sometimes that really puts us in a box versus someone who, who's an international student, right? Like me. I didn't have any language barriers, but I had a lot of cultural barriers. Like I call flip-flop sandals, and that confuses people. I call it jam jelly, right? Like when you say, give me a PB and jam, like, you mean PB and jam? Like peanut butter and jam? Like, no, it's jelly. Jelly means that. Like, there's all this, like, these translations that we need to do. And so inclusion systems really spend time understanding about different perspectives and identities. That way they can be this translator and they can be and listen to frustrations, right? Like, it's normal to be frustrated.
Yeah.
But then just go through that, like, how do you lead someone when they're in conflict with themselves? Like, let's listen, let's be curious how to do that. But yeah, that's usually what I do. I mean, and then, like, as a department, like, we're really trying to be, I oversee all justice education in the department. It's not really my only responsibility, but it's something that I'm passionate about. And so getting the department to like think about how we're going to be more inclusive, gender inclusive, how we're looking at bias incidents in the hall, how are we making sure that staff feel like they're not taking on extra burden because of their identity. Like, that's something that I'm passionate about, and I'm leading the department through. So I lead them through conversation and like curiosity in that too.
That's awesome. I mean, there's so many like great points, nuggets of information or knowledge just in that last response. And I think something that you highlighted that I just wanted to touch upon real quick and just kind of reiterate a little bit too is so important to like leadership, and something you mentioned is like really focused on your team, right? That's what I kind of pulled from that too, is like you're focused on taking care of your team and the people that are part of that process. Because again, like sometimes we get caught up in the day to day, or like you even said, like sometimes it's important to take that day off or that break, because we want to continue to be there. We want to help people. We want to make a difference, but it's important to take care of yourself as well through that process. And unfortunately, I think even not just in higher education, but I think in organizations, whether that's business, other jobs, career paths, like that conversation is not happening enough, where there's people in those roles that aren't focused on their people, I think, enough, or taking care of one another. And we know from research and other things, and tons of books and videos and data on this stuff. Y'all can spend some time on that in your own time. But talking about how taking care of your people first, whether that's in a team or organization, actually plays way more benefits in the long term, right? It's maybe a little bit difficult to transition in the short term and putting those resources and time into it, but it pays off so much more in the long term for many reasons. Maybe people are more willing to show up because they enjoy what they do, right? They will enjoy being part of a team. Maybe they don't have as much burnout as soon because they're taking care of themselves as well. So there's so many positives to that, but I think that's something that's super important. So audience, if you're on a team, right, if you're looking, maybe that's something you can kind of almost challenge and ask for from your leadership, or create that leadership from a change, right? Again, we talk about a lot too. You don't need that assigned, designated a leadership role to lead, right? You can do those things in a team, or maybe you are leading a team or restarting an organization. And I think that should be a focus point, is how you're taking care of your people and how are you showing up for your team as well, and not just for maybe the product or what you're putting out, even if that's including other people. Like, obviously you need to think of that too, like the audience and how people should, the key takeaways, but also how your team is going to show up and do those things as well. So
I'm a big believer in, if you're the head honcho, the
Mhm.
president or whatever, you need to be the least known person in the group, right? You need, as a leader, to make sure everyone else shines.
Mhm.
That's really your job, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, I'll talk about it, in the residence life forum, but the residents, we have so many residents, but on a floor, and there's one paraprofessional that oversees them, so they're leading these students. And then we have staff, like professional staff hall directors, who are overseeing about, I don't know, like between 6 and 14 paraprofessionals, and I'm overseeing 6 hall directors, right? It's all like, it's this whole pyramid of people, right? And we can get into that model, but you want to make sure you're caring about those people that are really in your way. But I don't want to be in a space where I'm the one that everyone comes to, because I know my hall directors, they know more about the way the buildings run. I need to take away barriers for them, right? The hall directors working with the RAs and the inclusion assistants and the CCAs to make sure they shine. They don't have to be the focus, right? And then the same thing with like the staff, student staff, they're making sure the residents shine. So like, you don't want to be the center of attention of it. You're really there to reduce barriers from them to make sure that they shine. So if you're a leader, and it is fun, like when my title says president, when it says assistant director, like, yeah, like I work for that,
and
right?
there's perks towards those leadership roles,
Exactly,
100%.
Right. A lot of doors open for me.
But it's for the position, not for the person, right? And as well.
And what do I do with that? I open the doors for other people. And I should be doing that, right? I don't say I do that all the time, perfectly, but like, because I have these doors open, like, oh crap, like, that's a cool opportunity for Brent. Like, let's do that. Like connecting people and reducing barriers so that they can be successful. Because you're not going to be in the same position forever. And if you want to be in the same position forever, that's great. But you're gonna have to like be open to changing that too.
Yeah, I'm challenging yourself.
Yeah,
100%. I love that. What's your favorite leadership approach or style to utilize in your leadership? Do you have like a top, when you like, or even to learn about?
Yeah. Well, I think I try really hard to be a servant leader.
Yeah.
To lead others in service to them, and one of my expectations of my staff is that I serve them. I really don't have a job if they're not there, so I'm there to reduce barriers, to make sure they feel safe, they feel comfortable, because then I'll trust them to do that for their staff. So I'm not in this micromanage. Like, I don't really care about every single detail about it. I need to know, like, are you capable of doing this big chunk of it? I'll help you through it, but I really care about this chunk. However you do it's great. Like, that's your own thing. Everyone works differently. I'm not expecting you to do it. There's some, and to be double back. There are certain things that need to be a certain way, right? Like, if there's a procedure that really needs to be done, that's great. But if like my expectation, and we're working on a project, like, I'll just use this for an example, because we have a lot of students listening. If it's a paper, the topics that need to be there for a paper, right?
Right.
But however you write it, that's not up to me. Like, I don't care about that. Like, you might spend 3 days on it, 1 day on it, a whole month on it. You might have finished it before the class even started. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
But all I want is that paper. And, if you're struggling with it, I'll help you. But all I care about that is that end product. And how do you need to feel supported in that? And if something's not working, I'll help you work through it. Let's solve the problem together. It's not, one of my staff members says, like, when I do bad, it makes you look bad, Yasas. So like, I'm really motivated in making sure you don't look bad. It's like, yes, that's kind of you, but we're working on the problem together. Don't ever feel like you're alone. So that's kind of my style, is making sure that they feel seen and heard, and that I'm serving them. So I always ask how to serve them. I'm there. I'm not there 24/7, 365, but it's like, I know this is an important day. This is something really important to you. How can I show up? When should I show up? And then, if it's after 5 o'clock, I'll stay. And then I take care of myself, right? Like, I'm done at 5 o'clock, right? Say, like, example, like you had a meeting from 8 to 5, whatever, 8 to 5. Wow, that's a whole day. But 4 to 5, it takes a little longer. The next day, you can rest and be like, I'm going to come in a little later. I'm going to, take a little time. I didn't spend more time on me. I need to balance that out, and that's okay. So I tell that to my staff and to my students too, right? We deal with a lot of crises in housing. There's students having their worst moments in the residence hall. And that's traumatic. Like, I have a lot of trauma responses from that. Like, I can't take a phone call without having almost a mini panic attack because of my experiences. But what I do with that is the next day I'm like, I'm going to have a very calm day. Got a call, I worked through this. I'm going to spend some time just like cooling off, because that's what I need. I tell that to my students, my staff, like, this happened. Okay. Like, let's work through it now. And then how are we going to take care of ourselves after? So that really like service mindset is what I'm going for. The thing I'm trying to learn more is, well, I'm also laissez-faire. Like, I think, like, it's like, do it the way you want. Just how do you need me? I think I'm trying to learn more on how to balance that with a little bit more authoritarian leadership. Like, there's sometimes you just need to
kind of be direct and
be
just
very direct.
just get to the point.
I'm afraid of hurting feelings, and so I tiptoe around stuff. And so I want to infuse some of that. So I'm kind by giving them good feedback. Right? Like, you're not doing this well. But if you think about, like, I can't even think about a good example, but like, you're doing something. Let's say, let me think of a good example real quick. For example, you're making a recipe, like you're making food, right? I don't really care how you make that food overall, right? If it tastes good, right?
Right.
That's the end product. But say you mistake sugar for salt, and your whole baking dish is destroyed because you use all the salt instead of sugar. That sucks, right? And if I tiptoe around and be like, oh man, it was tasty, I guess, like, that's not being...
That person might just do that again, right? And that's a mistake.
And that's not kind either, right? Like, and I'm out here, like, the one that they look as a leader, and I'm lying to them, and then a student or your best friend is like, this tastes like, I don't want to taste this ever again.
Right.
That's really harmful. So instead, I'm like, oh, something's wrong here. Can we, like, what's going on here? Like, this doesn't taste right. Let's figure it out together. That's something I'm learning on. Like, how do I say that more direct in a timely manner, so they can fix their mistakes and and save them from embarrassment too. Like,
for sure.
And like I said, like, if they look bad, it makes me look bad. If I look bad, they look bad too. Like, we're mutually invested in it. So
definitely
help them fix the recipe, and they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And they won't do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least they'll read the label more. Right?
Yeah.
So they might make the mistake again, but
slowly but surely it gets better, hopefully. Yeah. I think kind candor too, that idea it can be very difficult to share, because I mean, I think feedback, it's funny, we talked about this a couple episodes about feedback, but that it's hard to sometimes hear feedback, right? But it's really taking that mindset of taking feedback is a gift, right? But I think on the flip side of that, there's a lot of people don't know how to give feedback, right? And so, you have a couple bad experiences. Why would you? Well, of course you'd be scared, right? If someone's been maybe, rude or obnoxious with the feedback, or hurt sometimes, especially if it's someone you care about that you've accidentally hurt, or maybe done things on purpose. But you also need to hear that, because that's one of the best ways we can grow and develop, right? But I think that's a journey to work on giving and receiving feedback. But it's really about that mindset. You can take away positives in that or negatives, just depending on how you approach the situation, which is like everything in life, basically, when you boil it down, right? It's perspective. But I think it's super important.
I literally talked about this a couple of days ago. It's like, and it's also important when you're on the receiving end of the feedback. Like, sometimes you're not ready to get that, right? Yeah. So just being honest, like, I'm still processing this. I need a little time. Or like asking them, what is this about? Because I might not be in a headspace to do it. Give me an hour, give me, a day. Can we pick another time? Right. Not to avoid it. To be like, I need a second so that I'm here and like actually listening, instead of like in one ear out the other, right? That's not beneficial to anybody.
No.
And even if that's the case, right? Like, sometimes people are just telling you things just to tell you. Yeah. Like, okay, I appreciate that. this is, I appreciate that you told me. I see this, you're very passionate about it. These, not that this will make it right, but this is why I did it. I'm definitely going to keep this in consideration for the next time I do it. And sometimes it's a load of baloney, right? Like, that's fine. But there might be
smile and say thank you, right?
But there might be like an iota of like truth to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I guess I could have thought about this one small part, and that made a big difference to someone, So, but you might, if you're not there to like process it, then they're just talking to nobody, right? So it's not worth it. So like, I'm not ready right now. I need to go eat something before I get hangry. Or I need to drink some water, or I need to take a lap, and then I'll come back.
Right.
And then I'm ready. Or here's my schedule. Can we meet next week or tomorrow? That's good. That's okay. And if someone gets mad about it, like that's fine. Like that's them to be mad. But you're almost like giving them permission to say what they need to say, and you're not trying to get hurt too.
Right.
So.
There's an excellent point there as well on the topic of feedback. We're going to kind of get into change, right? Promoting change in teams, organizations, kind of that kind of vibe. But leading change obviously can be really challenging at times, just because, sometimes people like the processes that we work, or they need to know why things are being changed. And that could just be difficult for anyone, leadership, or for a leader, or for anyone involved in that process. But how can a leader communicate change effectively to team members?
There's also something I've been working on for a couple of years now. But one of the things I found to be very helpful is to be very honest. There's some things you can't say, right? Like, you might be prevented from your leader above you to say all these certain things, and you don't want to cause panic. That's not what you want to do.
No.
But you want to be honest with them on what's going on, so that they're not caught off guard. But you also want to give them the why. And then help them process that.
Yeah.
Right? They might be very angry about it. They might be very excited, and both are valid. But if they live in the anger, then they're not gonna, help you in that process, right? But if they live in the happy too, like, they might be so blinded by the happy that they don't listen to the rest of the reasons, right? So, when it usually comes to change for me, I tell them, okay, I don't know if listeners, you might benefit from looking at this. There's a TED Talk on how people give speeches. Like, they talk about Steve Jobs a lot, because when we got the iPhone, that was like a huge moment. And if you haven't watched that, watch the first release of the iPhone. And it might not land with you, because you may have never used a flip phone, like an old BlackBerry before. But when he showed the first iPhone, it was like, this is the world we live in. Here's the reality. And here are the challenges that we have. Yeah. But can you imagine a future that's better? This is what will look better. And it's like, it goes back to here's another problem. But what if we could change it and it could be better? This is what we want it to look like, right? So going back and forth, what the current reality is and what we want it to be, and just making people feel invested in it, and then telling them, okay, and this is something that's changing, and I think that it will help solve some of this stuff. And it won't solve everything. I mean, Steve Jobs is not going to say the iPhone sucks in some reasons. When the first iPhone came out, it wasn't amazing, but it was also amazing in other places as well, right? It did good things and bad things. But you want to be honest about both as a leader, right? You're not trying to sell a product. You're trying to sell them the good and the bad, because they're going to deal with it. Right. So it solves these things. We might be stepping back in some of these things, but I think overall it's going to take a step forward, and helping them process that. Sometimes change is not what you want, right? Yeah. You might have feelings about it, and be honest about it too. Like, I don't 100% agree with it, but I can see where they're going, and this is the why. But we have to do it, and I'm going to make meaning of it this way. I don't like this policy, but you know what? We're going to do it in a way that is going to benefit people. There's so many policies that I have to tell my staff, I don't agree with it. I'm going to be honest, but I know this is what other people need. This is what is going on. I know we can give a high quality product. Even if it's not something we like, we can do it to 100%. That's great. Right. And that gets them really fired up. But when my staff is, frustrated about it, let them vent. Let them be frustrated. Okay, tell me more. What's going on here? What's like, what's the reason? We talked about that conflict stuff, like in conflict with themselves and their conflict with that change. Tell me, be curious, and then everyone might chime in and be like, great, fantastic, I'm gonna write this down, because maybe the people who told you or the change, if you were the one who bring the change, maybe I didn't consider all this stuff. Okay,
Right.
I see where you're going. If it wasn't you bring the change, I'll pass this up because they might not consider it. If it's you, like, I didn't consider that, or I considered that this is how we're gonna solve that problem. And if it's a really big thing that you need to consider, by honestly, I didn't think about that.
Right.
Do you mind helping me figure this out? Because we have to do this, right? This change is coming, but we can make it better. So can we work on it together? So invite them to change with you, and invest. It makes people more invested.
For sure.
So
yeah, I know I've heard too some things like over communicating the change, right? Making sure that people are really on board, and and also giving them a stake in a process is a huge thing that really gets them, like you said, involved and maybe even excited for that change a little bit more because they feel a part of that vision or that movement, right?
yeah.
And also I think being available too, right? Especially in that leadership role, like for questions, like you said, or for time, for space, for venting. Especially if some people don't want to adapt or agree to that. So no, I think that's super important. One of the many things I admire in you and what I've seen you do a lot is you really bring that, and you kind of mentioned it a couple times in there, you bring the idea of what's the why behind this. You always ask those questions, a deeper root, right? What's the purpose of this? Why are we doing it this way? And that brings, I think, it challenges the current process or system maybe, or maybe just more curiosity, but also I think it also gives people on a team the opportunity even to maybe even speak some points that maybe they wouldn't have shared, right? Or maybe they keep it to themselves because someone says one thing or you bring that idea in there. Why is that so important? Asking like the why behind it, and really how did you kind of come to that, like through your leadership? Because I think it's really important, and I don't necessarily think a lot of people do that all the time, but yeah, do you have there's like a story to that or the reasoning behind that? Obviously it's important, right? But how that came to be, or
honestly, it's a lot of failures on my end.
Interesting. Okay.
So in my journey as a leader, I have failed a lot. I failed people a lot, and a lot of times it's it's change, or I'm in charge of something, and I just it makes sense to me. So I have ADHD, and part of my ADHD and part of my anxiety related to that is that I think of every single possible scenario. Like before we sat down, I had dreams about like how every single conversation would go, and you hadn't even sent me the question, so I was in the shower. I was already like talking about my answers. So that's the kind of person I am. So I've already thought about every single scenario. So I'll just do it, and I won't tell people why I did it, and they'll be really upset, right? Like especially when they're invested in it,
right?
Or they found a way to work the old system, and they're like, and then sometimes there are things that I'm teaching that like I don't give the why to, and they're like, so what's the reason? And it leaves people really like off guard. And what people don't want, they don't want to feel stupid, right? Like you don't want to ever make someone feel less than because of something you do. That should never be your goal,
right?
But if you do make a decision and you don't give them the why, they have a lot of questions that makes them feel incompetent. They makes them feel like they don't understand, and that's not a comfortable place to be in. And a lot of people gave me feedback, and even now it's like the why. That makes a big difference. And when I started doing that, even in the discussion, they were like, "Why did you do this?" And then I explained like this is this, and this. This is the connection I made to it. One, they understood, and then two, they gave me feedback on like, you didn't consider this, right? So even in my like 1,000 scenarios, it'll be like, actually, but did you think about the cost of gas on this day? And I'm like, whoa. And that's just a random thing, but that did happen to me one day. We were doing we were driving to a conference, and I had budgeted for gas prices in one state, and we went way over budget on gas coming back because we got gas from a state that was like super expensive.
Right.
And they were like, "Why'd you go over budget?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't really think about that."
Yeah, right.
Because so there's so many things that involving other people is important in, but the why is also important because when you think about it as a leader, and you think about leadership in general outside of student organizations, right? Businesses. I'm in a business, right? Education is a business. My team needs to know the why, because they're the ones who will end up doing the work, right? A lot of leadership people will just give decisions and they're not working on it, right? And what I try to do is I try to do the work with them, but I don't live that work every day, right? So the why is important because they do the work. Excuse me. And they need to tell other people about it. But two, because they might have a different perspective. So the why is important to know, but if you don't have their perspective, then it doesn't matter at all. So what I'm trying to do now, and this is a good for everyone to know, if something involves someone else, like you're making a decision for someone else and it impacts someone else, I should say, you should get their perspective, even if it's one person. And you really you should invite them into it. So if you're making a decision for your org, and it involves, you say, I'm using the president as a metric, but it can be any position. But you're making decisions about money. You're gonna spend this much money. Did you ask the treasurer of your org to be part of that conversation? No. Well, they have to deal with the money, so they're gonna be upset that you made the decision, right? So invite them, like, I'm going to make this decision. This is where I want to go. Can you help me do this? And so they can help you with the why. And when they tell that to other people, right, when you present that information, they can give the why. Like, I do this. I got this information. I helped Yasas make this decision. If you have a group of members like me who are in the same position, you can invite one of them just to be your liaison, like I mentioned before, like help me make this work. Invite them to make that change with you, and then they can build a why with you, and then they can also ask their peers for feedback, so they can be that voice for other people. So if you're a student in a student org, if you're making a huge org change, bring some of your members in, right? Not just your leadership team, right? Because we're high in the sky. Ask the people who are actually down on the ground, we're trying to make this change. What do you think about it?
Involving all the stakeholders in the process, right?
Exactly. And then your why might change. So you might have a why as a leader, change this. And when they give their story to you, you might be like, oh, my why is really going to hurt people. Or my why really doesn't change anything. But their why makes a big difference.
Right.
And then maybe we make it together. And that makes a big difference. And isn't it just nice to work with other people?
100%.
To have build something together. It's always nice to be the one person who made everything happen. But I used Steve Jobs as an example before, right? He's hailed, he's legendary leader or whatever. He made a lot of mistakes, so don't idolize everybody. But he didn't build the iPhone, right? He didn't build that. He had a whole team of people, right?
He provided the vision,
exactly. Yeah.
And the why behind it.
Why. But and there's so many problematic things that Steve Jobs have done. So that's what I'm saying. Don't idolize him. But, he couldn't have done it alone.
Right.
And the software people had to talk to him. We can't do this. We can't do this. Hardware people that talk to him. The marketing people that talk about this. So there's so many people involved in the decision. And you can just choose to bulldoze over it. But I think you'll have a great experience and better change if you involve the right people, the people who are actually going to be impacted by it. I don't even remember what the question was, but
no, we're going on. It's how do leaders communicate change effectively? But no, it was the why, actually, that part of it. It was your ability to use why and how you do so well with that with your team. No, that was awesome. That was super powerful. Everything you said there. Can't wait to clip that one down. It's gonna be that's good.
Cut it up. Chop it up.
Chop it up. No, it's a good one to utilize for content. But how can a leader inspire others? Because we kind of talked about a vision here. Using a vision during a team or an organizational change period. Again, getting people on board, I guess, essentially. In the process.
I feel bad for the listeners who are probably mostly students, right? I'm going to use a lot of examples that are not student-focused, but I think I'm going to try and connect it to something that students might experience, because in an organization, especially when you're a leader, you see so many things that other people don't, right? In my level, I oversee almost 2,000 students in my community. And I see every single detail about every single person. Like, it's not Big Brother, but like, like if someone has had a hard time in one building, I know, about another student in another building, right? I know the bad stuff that's going on. I also know the good stuff.
Right.
Like they got the best grades in the entire, hall. I know that information too. It's very Big Brother, and I apologize if that makes you nervous, but I know a lot of information, right? My staff knows their building, everything about it,
Yeah.
but they don't know everything about the other communities, right?
Gotcha.
So a lot of what's coming to me is a lot of information, so I can see these puzzle pieces fitting in, and so part of visioning and like inspiring people is trying to understand what's going on for the whole thing. I think. And I have this in my journal here. I have a list of wins and losses that I've had. Like, it's not always healthy to think about wins and losses like that, but I need it just for me. So I don't recommend it for everybody, but it's also good just to know what you've accomplished. One of the wins I have is helping my team feel more heard, and making my team feel more efficient.
Gotcha.
Like we had a lot of paper processes that were like, man, from the 60s. Like that's, it worked then, but it doesn't work now, right? Like, and I always question them, why do we do this? And they would tell me like, this helps with this and this helps with this. And I'm like, okay. But what would make it easier? Like they'll be like, man, it takes a lot of time to, do all this stuff and have it in all these places, and then it gets lost and we can't find stuff. And I was like, okay, if I helped you make that easier, would it make your job easier? And they would say yes. So I would be curious, like what they wanted, what they needed, and then all 5 of my staff and like my peers, they'd tell me all this information. So I spent almost 6 months just like absorbing. It's not a luxury that all students have with their organizations,
right?
But if you're in a larger position, like absorbing information is part of it. What's the why? Why do we do these things? And some of the whys are really bad, right? So it's like, we do this because we want to prevent people from being autonomous. Ooh, that's not a good thing. So why are we doing that? Because we don't trust people. Oh, why do we do that? We have a culture of fear. Okay. If I change the culture of fear, will people feel more valued here? Yes. Yeah. So, right. So I tackled that problem that way. And for you students who are, starting organizations, right, you don't have the luxury of 6 months because that's half your year. But, spend a week or two talking to the people who were there before, people who might have information, your advisor, how the stuff goes, and then they might have an idea of things that are going. So you might have a idea of what to change, right? You might know, I want to lead this organization this way, but it would really be foolish of you not to think about how it impacts other people and what they need. So and not to think of wins and losses again, right? Like, but like your vision could really impact someone else in a negative way. So you want to prevent that. So talk to them, say what they need. So you want to give them something so that makes their life easier. You don't want to ever do something that really makes someone's life harder, right? Like we all just want to make it easy. Just make it easy. So work with people and say what would make it easier for you to do, and then help them do that. So part of the visioning stuff is one, listening. Then with that, they might give you some good ideas on what needs to change. And then like the Steve Jobs example, like when you got all this information together, think about what the current reality is. What do you think it should be in the future? What have people told you what the future should look like?
Right.
And then you build something or you help make something that bridges that gap. So for a lot of organizations, it's like processes, right? Like we're going to do this differently so we waste less time. We're going to do this differently so that students feel like they're more valued. We're going to do this differently so that students have better grades. And when you think about big companies, they think about money, right? If we do this, we have less overhead, we make our product better, things like that, right? We want to get to that, but you got to think about where you are now, what the future can look like, what can it be, and getting them there in that process. One of the wins, and I was going back to that win, one of the wins I have for my leadership here at CMU is I spent in the spring, after the end of the semester, I talked to my staff, like, let's have a visioning day. What did we, we did something called a SWOT, which is like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Start. there's also something called Start Stop Continue. Sorry.
Gotcha.
And they just wrote like, what are the strengths of our team? What do we do this year? What are some weaknesses, opportunities, threats? And we just discussed it. And then we're like, so what could this look like? Like, what if we took all these strengths and, or took all these threats and weaknesses and used our strengths to overcome them? What could that look like? And they just like talked it out. And they gave me so many ideas.
Right.
And one of the things is that we wanted to help the student staff have better grades because they were really struggling.
Interesting.
Especially after COVID, like
right.
Every student is struggling.
For sure.
So these students, staff were like really asked to be everything to everyone, which is not the model that we want. But but we feel like we want to be everything to everyone. They're struggling for their grades, and so we talked about how can we make a better space for them so that they're successful, right? Because they're here students.
Right, there's your students as well.
And so we talked about that. We talked about having better relationships with our custodians because, I'll be honest, like some of y'all leave the spaces really bad. Like
they do a lot of great things for
they
the
clean
facilities.
It up. I mean, right? Everyone has flaws, but they make sure when you walk in those spaces in the beginning of the year, it's clean. And
right.
every day they clean the hall. They wipe stuff down. They take the trash out. They don't take your trash out, but they take the trash out in the lobbies. Make sure the lobbies look good. And it's really disheartening to for them to come back next day and then students have just like destroyed it.
Right.
Like turned chairs upside down, thrown pizza everywhere. That's really hard, right? And there was a big rub with custodians because they were feeling hurt. So this year we dedicated let's have a better relationship with the staff and let's help the students feel connected to the custodians so they don't do that, right? And I want to say this: it's not every student does this, but there are a group of students that really trash our spaces, right? And you may know that person. That's really hard to work through, right? So those are the things they want. And so when we came back in the fall in the training, I was like, okay, this is what we wanted to do. I thought about it summer. Here's some things that I think we can do. What do you think we can do? And so we made the action plan. Like, this is how we get there. So they're really invested now. At least I think so now.
Yeah.
But they're really invested because that's something cool. that they can see real value in, and that's the stuff that they came up with.
Right.
And right, I saw that as the person seeing all the buildings, but I didn't want to say like this is exactly what I'm going to do because they're not invested.
Right.
But I could say, Brandon said this to me a couple weeks ago, and it was really bothering him. So like, can we do something about it? And then they're invested. Like you would be invested in that if I was trying to help you.
Yeah.
So.
What role does empathy play in leadership and that change process, right?
Yeah. I mean, everything I was talking about is all empathy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
To understand where someone's coming from, at least to a certain degree, right? Listeners, if you don't know the difference between sympathy and empathy, there's a great TED Talk that Brene Brown does. I would recommend it.
I have to try and link it if we can find it and stuff.
Yeah, it's a cool. the video that comes up is a nice animation of animals.
And I remember that one now.
Right, the sympathy, right? Like you're just saying, I feel bad for you. Like I'm sorry, and it really doesn't come from a place of like understanding. But empathy is really connecting to something that maybe you've gone through, right? Like, no one has the same experience, right? Like Brandon, if you're going through something hard. Like say, something like you get hurt today. Yeah, it hurts for you, but I can't feel that pain, right? But I can remember a time where, man, I hurt myself. I can be like, man, that must really suck. Because I remember that, like, when that happened to me. You're not saying that you've gone through the same thing. You're saying, I can understand how that can be painful.
Yeah.
So, like, let's go get first aid kit, whatever, like that, right? So you're not saying that you understand exactly what they're going through, but you can connect it to a moment where you could have felt the same. And sometimes you don't have an exact experience that is the same, but you can. I encourage you to think about something that is relevant to that. So, like, I can give an example of like, I have staff members who are female presenting. I'm a male, like I'm a cis male person. I don't know what that female presenting person, like, what they go through every day, right?
Yeah.
Like, the world is not built for women, right? It's really built for cis white men, like, right? Miss America. But I can't say like, I really understand what you're going through as a woman. I'm not a woman. I don't identify that way. I don't have that experience, but I can think about all those little jib jabs that I've gotten, as a kid who got bullied when I came to the States as well, like being an immigrant, like the barriers that I had to go through.
Yeah.
I can remember how hard that is, right? And if you're someone who is a cis white man, right, and the whole world seems to be built for you, you can still have empathy, right? There are times when doors have been shut in your face. There have been times where you even the simplest example of like the light didn't turn green and you got frustrated, right? You can use those like even smallest examples of pain to connect with someone. And it's okay. It's okay if you don't have all the right examples, but you can connect with someone. It's really loving someone enough to understand where they're coming from. Anyway, that's all to be said. But when you're a leader, you're trying to understand where someone's coming from.
Okay.
Not to say that I know exactly what you're going through, but I can connect with, oh man, that could be frustrating. Oh man, that could be exciting. That's a great thing. Like, and I talked a lot about negative stuff, but there's so many good stuff too, right? When someone says like, I figured this thing out, right? The way you feel happy is empathy. It's like, oh, that feels good for you. Like, I remember when you were really like struggling with that.
Right.
I'm celebrating you, and I can understand that, like, working through something hard and then actually achieving it. That's really powerful. So you want to celebrate that person, right? There's so many good things with empathy too. Yeah. Usually we are not really good at the negative part of it. So that's why I bring that up. Like when it sucks, like you can really link to someone that way.
Yeah.
But and the same thing. I mean, everything I talk about is really empathy. Is like when you're going through a change and you're asking them with their opinion, them to vent, and you're trying to connect and be curious. That's empathy.
Right.
It's like, explain. Can you explain why you're feeling this way? And what you're doing is not trying to ask them, just asking for asking's sake. I encourage you to think about how that would feel for you if you were in their shoes. If you had a similar experience, how that would feel to you. And that's what empathy does. It helps you be a better leader because you're trying to work with others. It's not you against the world. It's us.
Right.
It's the organization is
point of that,
people.
right?
It's not one.
Exactly.
It's everybody. So
working together.
It's all that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Sweet. How can leaders foster a culture of adaptability? Because adaptability is so critical in leadership, and one of those goals of the leaders to build other leaders, right? So how can leaders foster that culture of adaptability?
That's a good question. I think we talk about perspectives a lot.
Okay.
Is to help them have different perspectives.
Yeah.
So back to me being a president of a professional development organization. Part of why we go to conferences, part of why we do trainings is to get different perspectives. So in class, I grew up in engineering, right? In engineering, things are like cut and dry.
Right.
Right. Like there's not a lot of adaptability in those kinds of classes, and that's why schools have you go through like a social science class and things like that, like different requirements. And you're like, I came here to be an engineer. Why do I need to go to a women's studies class? Well, it's because those classes encourage you to think outside the box of those realities.
New experiences.
Right? Like even in psychology, right? You think about that's trying to understand the human. That's based in science, so there's some formula to that too. But if you think about sociology, that's talking about how things work in society, like these small societies, right? Thinking outside the box. So those perspectives matter a lot. So when you're a leader, to think about, how could this be different, and to like look at different perspectives, that encourages adaptability. Because when you get a big problem, if you only have one way of thinking about it, the whole world could look like nails. What's the example? You know what I'm talking about? Like if you are a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And you just like hammer it. But you might just need to be a screwdriver to screw it down.
Right.
So if you only have one way of thinking about it, you might try to solve the problem brute force just one way.
Right.
But if you have different perspectives, you might understand, like, maybe if you have a different approach, you can do something different. And my favorite example of this is when I was a student staff member. I had a student who was going through their own like little crisis, but they wasn't telling us. They were really struggling on their own. And I was, I was trying to make jokes and make everyone feel happy. So I went through the floors, knocking on doors, saying hi. I was just like, everyone's having a bad mood. I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
make everyone feel good. So I was joking around, and a lot of people really enjoyed that, and that's great. And I got to this student store, and they were like, "Not today," and they shut the door in my face. I was like,
Wow.
"Oh,
Yeah.
I really hurt them." I just used one way of like making them feel better,
Mm.
and then I was like, "Oh man, that made me feel bad."
Right.
And like I probably made them feel really bad too. So I took a minute, took a breath, and I was like, "Hey," I knocked on the door again, talked to them, walked through it, and they're like, "What I needed wasn't a joke. What I needed was someone to talk to." I was like, "Oh, I guess I could have just asked how you're doing instead of just like assuming that you needed a joke
Mm-hmm.
to lift your spirits up." And it was like, "Yeah, that's what I needed." So we sat down, we talked
Yeah.
for like half an hour, and then she felt great. And then she cracked the same joke I did,
Mm.
and then made me laugh. So like it made her feel better too. So,
Right. But needed that different
so,
experience.
yeah, different perspective on how you can do something, or different experience will make a difference. So professional development is one of those things. Like if you're a leader, a lot of like not SGA, but campus life, they'll do like trainings and stuff. It's not really like to say like you always need a training.
Right.
It's to say like you're going to be with other student leaders. They might teach you a different way to do stuff, or they might give you a tip or two. If you have the opportunity to go to a conference as a student, you might learn a lot from other people are doing it. If you've only been to CMU, your parents have only been to CMU, this is the only culture you know, and you get a trip to go to like MSU or something, like, wow, I really love stuff about MSU, like how they do stuff, and MSU might learn from you as well. You bring some of that here, and you change some stuff, right? You think about it the same way all the time. Like it really, one, it gets boring. I hate that. But two, you might be trying to hammer something that's a screw. So it might be a difference. But yeah, that really fosters adaptability. And not to say you need to go on conferences and stuff, but like there's so many good YouTube videos on like how to like do stuff. And I'm seeing a lot of TikToks and like reels on this too. Like it'll just pop up and it's like a podcast like this, and they're talking about like how they solve the problem, and you just listen to it. Like maybe it's boring, but maybe they say something. Maybe you look at it just to laugh at it, but you might get something different from it. A lot of like the things I've learned in like the justice place is like people's perspectives on what they're experiencing, and then they like, I'm like, oh, maybe I should learn more about that. I definitely recommend. So there are a couple YouTube channels. If I not sponsoring us, obviously, but like Vox Media, like, and I'll say it's a very liberal entity, right? So if that doesn't align with your values, that's okay. But they go into a lot of investigation of people's perspectives, but also like these system stuff, like why does redlining make a big difference in our voting systems? Like, what is the electoral college? But then they also go into like why orcas are not they're not on the same migration path anymore. Things like that. Like you're like, oh, cool, I didn't know that. So that might just spark something in you, you know? So definitely that. I'm a big nerd, so I like science stuff, but there's a guy called Veritasium. I don't know if you've heard, but he's a big science guy. And he talks about how the world works, and it gets complicated, I will say. But you learn something. But an even more fun science channel is called Smarter Every Day. And they do like science experiments and stuff. That's really cool. But they like talk about these concepts of like how the world works, and they give you some ideas. So different ideas and perspectives on how things work. I think it's just interesting. Those are some science examples, but like then your YouTube algorithm changes, and so you'll get some more stuff. So
that algorithm.
But that's also
so
the
this
thing.
pops up in their algorithm, right?
Exactly. But the algorithm also is something we want to change. Adaptability about that is that our phones are always just listening to us, and so you'll always see the same TikToks, Reels, whatever, YouTube. But if you start searching one random thing that's like not your normal, it'll pop all these things up, and you'll just automatically learn. So like
down a new path, right? Or learning new things.
If someone says something to you, you're like, I don't understand what they're saying. Just literally like type it on Instagram and like look at a reel, and for the next week you'll get stuff that's related to it, and you just learn passively, and that's okay. And I learn a lot of stuff like that.
100%. Yeah, it's funny. Real quick too, we can't see him right now, but Mello was nodding his head to all those channels Yasas mentioned. So definitely check him out. He seems to be a big fan too. But I think that's so interesting too, because the idea of social media and content is, I think sometimes we forget we have the ability to look things up too, right? If we're not happy with things that are showing up in our feed or, you know, things we're seeing, you can make the change, right? You don't have to view that content if you don't want to. You don't have to believe those things either. But I think sometimes we get caught in, like, and I think there's some big connotation. They're like, oh, well, social media is so negative. Well, there's a lot of positivity out there too. You're just maybe not looking for it. Like, you can find what you're looking for. If you want to find, you know, a disagreement online, you can find that super easy. If you want to find something positive, you can find that as well, right? So I think it's just what you're searching for, maybe what's reinforced. But that's even a great tip too. That, like, I don't know what you think about too. If you want to learn something new, maybe you research that a little bit, and then you might get some, you know, similar videos or things or content that also apply to that, where you can learn more about it, or don't if you don't want to either. You see something, I don't like this, you don't have to watch it again. And it's up to you. You're in control of that too. And I don't think we always remember that, at least.
Yeah, and to jump off that a little bit is we talked this about in justice education a lot, right? So when you have a specific experience and you have a specific identity, right? Like I always use myself. So I'm an immigrant. So when I talk about the issues of visas and things like that, and like, this is really impacting me, I'll talk about it to people, right? And it's not really always up to me to educate everybody around me, right? I just be like, this is something I'm going through, and it's hard. And I'll just say that. And if you're like, oh, I don't understand why it's hard for him, go search that on YouTube, right? Spend 5 minutes on YouTube, on Google, so you don't, like, burden someone every day. Like, it sucks getting asked, like, every day. It's like, you know, if I told everyone that I'm, like, really struggling through this, and, like, every person came up to me like, so tell me every single detail about the visa process. And I'm like, oh man, I'm exhausted about that, right? And you can think about that, like, as a person of color, as a queer man, like, if someone is asking me about that every day, like, man, that sucks, right?
Yeah.
But if you spend 5 minutes, like, this is, like, some of the things that they're going through,
Yeah.
you might have some more interesting questions or some more empathetic questions you can ask them that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, instead of asking me, give me every single detail about the visa process, that's the example I asked. It's like, ask me about, if you spend 5 minutes on Google, like, so, like, how you, like, where are you in the process? Like, do you need any help? I know a friend who's this way. I learned that, or, you know, I learned something about Sri Lanka, like it's a fun place. Like, how are you how are you doing here? I don't know. It just more interesting than just, like, tell me every single detail about this thing.
Right.
But that's identity focused. But if you want to talk about, like, you know, something in an organization, if you're like, I'm confused about this policy, I'm confused about, like, how we do things, and it's like, okay, like, did you look it up first?
Yeah.
You know, I have a question about this. Okay. If asking me to explain everything in detail about it, and we're wasting everybody's time. But if you spend 5 minutes reading it up, you might, one, answer all those questions you had, or two, have more insightful questions. So you can help solve the problem. You know, you don't have to be the problem. Just solve the problem.
Like, be curious, right? We've talked a lot about today. Show that curiosity, and do the work yourself a little bit, and spend time and stuff. And I think there's a lot of positives to that too, because, you know, if you're showing, hopefully it's genuine, right? And interest in things for other people. One, I think build a stronger rapport and a relationship with them, but also you're learning way more too, right? And maybe, you know, you did a little research, and maybe a new question arises, and that's someone you ask someone that, and you now have a lot of new knowledge too, right? Or maybe you bring in a perspective to even that person you're asking a question, like, oh, I haven't thought about that way that you saw that. I'm curious to learn more about what you think, you know? So it's just a great way to kind of build those relationships, and learn more about others as well. So
that's what I love about Brandon. He's really good about taking things that people talked about and just, like, condensing it down to, like, actual good nuggets. So
thanks.
So
well, I appreciate that, but I definitely ramble on too. But yeah, well, thank you. What are some, maybe list a couple challenges that are maybe common that arise for leaders during, like, a change process, and how can maybe they address them? And we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but is there any, like, maybe just like a list of 2 to 3 that come to mind that maybe are common, and then maybe some solutions or potential solutions to those?
Yeah, I won't say I have all the answers to this, because I'm kind of still going through it.
Right.
And there's no one way of solving a problem.
For sure.
Like I mentioned before, I think what I've seen is people are invested in the now, especially if if you were hurt before and you figured out, you know, I use hurt, but, you know, you went through a change before. Let me change that back to that. You went through a change before in this current system, policy, whatever, and it you figured out a way to navigate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't change. It wasn't the best thing, but you figured out a way to do it. You got invested in it, and you got perfect at it, just navigating perfectly. And then someone else comes by and says, "We're going to change everything again." They're remembering how hard it was the first time,
Right.
so they're invested in this old system because it's safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
And what you need to do is tell them that you're going to work with them and help them make it a good process for them, right? And honestly, probably what you're going to do, most likely, is going to help them in the long run. But they probably can't see that because they're remembering that past frustration. Yeah. So that's one of the things that comes up a barrier, because like, I don't want to go through this again. All right, you got the solution that is, you got to spend time with them and show them that you're invested in them and making this better for them, right? And the why, right? The other thing that's a barrier is sometimes you only have certain scopes that you can work in, right? Like we don't have power over everything. So sometimes the problem you're trying to solve, or the change that's solving, is of something that you have no complete control over. So people get frustrated with that. And also, it's a resistance to change. Like, I can't change this. My hands are tied. That's really frustrating. So the solution to that is, my hands are tied here, but what else can I make? Whatever I have control over, how can I make that the best I can? I mean, I gave an example before about, like, whatever we have control over, we're going to do 100%. That's all we can do. And then, you take that feedback or frustrations, you take it to the people who have the power and say, like, this is what people are saying. Like, fine, we have to do this thing. But, these are the things maybe we didn't consider, or, like, just FYI, like, this is going to be something that we got to consider in the future. So that's another thing. And maybe a third thing that people get frustrated about is change takes time.
Yeah.
It takes effort.
Patience.
And patience, yeah. So even if it is going to give you more time back, it's going to make you feel like more safe and make your job easier, it takes time to do it. So, like, I think a lot of us, and include myself, this false notion we can make the change happen right now.
Right.
In your mind, that's way faster.
Yeah.
But organization change takes 4 to 5 years to do, especially in colleges. But say you had a bad leader before you, and they were here 25 years. That's 25 years of bad leadership, right? It's going to take almost about that time to change that. So
a lot of unlearning to do in this process, right?
Exactly. Unlearning, new culture stuff, new system. Like, there's so many things. People live in fear, right? So we talked about that fear culture. It's hard to change that, and that's a normal human process. But you gotta just dig slowly and help them feel safer and comfortable. And what? Here are the realistic goals.
Right.
Here's what we can see in the future. And just knowing where we're going makes a big difference too. So those are the things I can think of right now.
100%. And I think too, that whole aspect of patience, and not to discourage it, because that's creating positive change in organizations or teams for other people is 100% worth it and rewarding. Very challenging, and does take time. And we always like to say, positive culture can take years to build, but take one moment to shatter, right? If you think about it, same thing kind of with trust, right? It's one of those things that, again, not to make someone nervous, because you can make mistakes and still have positive culture, 100%. But it's keeping that in mind, that it does take time and it does take work, but it's well worth it, and especially when you can do that with other people and inspire them along the way. I think it's vital. So. Yeah,
and if you make a mistake, apologize.
Yeah.
Own it. It's, sometimes you make a mistake. Yeah, accountability. Maybe what you did wrong, you still think it's the right thing to do. But I made this decision with the information I had, and I think it was the right decision. But I can see that this, had a negative impact. Apologize for that. That's not what I wanted to do.
Right.
How can I make this better?
Exactly.
Let's just be accountable to it. And I can say from experience, there's a lot of things that I haven't apologized for that, sometimes I don't agree with. But I know that the people that it impacted, it makes a big difference for them. So sometimes I gotta let go of my ego and be like, this.
It takes a lot of humility to do that. It's challenging, but it's so important. Yeah. And those are what those top or most effective leaders can do during that process. And again, too, it's not if, it's when you make mistakes, right? Because everyone's gonna make mistakes along the process.
Exactly.
Like, we're human, and maybe even you do one thing in the moment that works well, and again down the line it doesn't work anymore, and it does cause future mistakes. You don't always know either, and so being comfortable making mistakes, but also making sure that when you are making those decisions that they're you're going through the thinking process. You're including other people in those decisions that we've talked about like today. And you just got to trust it and go with it. There's never a perfect decision either. You go one way or the other. Like, this way could have panned out, but maybe something bad happened. You never will know. Maybe this moment you're struggling, but it's going to pan out. You just don't know. But just showing up the best you can for your people and for yourself and for your team to make those changes happen. So, okay. Here's the $1 billion question for you. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, but how can we challenge and push the importance of leadership and leadership development at both that like macro level and the micro level?
Oh, wow, you're gonna give me $1 billion if
Yeah,
answer
if you give me the perfect answer, I don't have it, but someone will. We'll find a way to get you $1 billion.
TM, trademark. How do you get people challenge and push the importance of leadership and leadership development with micro? I think we need a different label for leadership. I think when people think of leadership, it's like, I want to be president, I'm going to be in this organization, I want to be this,
CEO.
right? Yeah. There are negative connotations to it, but I think people have this one idea of what leadership is. And we talk so many times about self-leadership, like being curious about yourself. That really opens the door to be curious about other people, and that helps you lead others. So I think my answer would be is spending more time learning about yourself, learning about yourself, which will then lead to learning about others. So the empathy that we talked about, that's the game changer.
Okay. Empathy, love it.
Yeah, I mean, you can make $1 million, $1 billion on like in any position, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you like crap to other people,
it
doesn't even matter. What you work all that work for just to bring people down, So to understand other perspectives, yourself and others, is the place to be. So I mean, I obviously feel that way. One, like, I love Leadership Institute, but also like in residence life, like that's all we do. It's like the micro stuff of leadership.
It's everywhere, right? That's why I think it's so important. I mean, like, for audience listening, like, you don't even have to necessarily have a full be in a leadership program. We really encourage you to attend those experiences, and you can get that in tons of different experiences around college campuses, or even in college. You're in the workforce now, or you're in high school or wherever, or you don't want to go to college. That's totally fine too. You can find those opportunities in so many different ways, and it's so transferable to every industry, every field, because we need leadership. We need ethical leadership in the world. Super important. What about like the smaller level? Would you say, is there something like people can do to kind of push that narrative, to make that, because it is so important to kind of share that with others, so they kind of realize, or maybe get them into the more of that positive perspective of what leadership really is? Because I totally agree. I think there's a lot of misconceptions of what leadership is, and at least in our society here in America, or maybe in a more capitalist geared society. Over the last 50 years, it's been, I think, like you said, a negative connotation to leadership, or that misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, it's still related to empathy. It's the accountability part of it. So even when accountability to self and accountability to others, and starting small, your friend group. I mean, for a lot of the freshmen who are coming in this year, you're gonna make friends here. Sometimes you're gonna have conflict, and you're gonna have disagreements. You're gonna have a lot of good times too, but sometimes we make mistakes, and if we're not listening to other people, right, we might not know that we've hurt them. We might not even know that they're celebrating something good, right? It might be someone in our world, but like, I did something bad. I apologize. I want to make this better. How can I make this better? And we talk about a lot about negative stuff, but like the positive stuff too. Like if you're all in your world, and you're not thinking about the people around you, you might not celebrate them when they need it most. Like that you did this hard thing. That's amazing. Or like this happened for your family. Like I know this is like you talked about how important this was for your family. Like let's go celebrate.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate each other. Like, that's a great place. That's also accountability, right? It's not just like the negative accountability, but accountability to like hype people up, to make them feel important, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of leadership. That's there, but it's like leading every day. That's
Okay.
practicing leadership. That's being
Right.
there. So accountability is something that we talked about is missing in like this perception of leadership, right?
Okay.
Like the big Fortune 500 company CEOs.
Yeah.
That's not something that they're known for.
Right.
I'm sure they try in their own way,
Mm-hmm.
but that's something that we see they're not accountable.
Yeah.
So, if your ambition is to be a leader, be accountable.
Right.
And it's not saying I apologize for everything. It's like, it's listening. Like, here's my intention. Here's my impact. I'm sorry if it didn't land. I am sorry. I'm not sorry if. I am sorry that it didn't land really well. Help me make this better.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be better. Like, here are the things I can do, but what can I do? So that's the friendships, your family.
Yeah.
How many times have you had fights with your family
Mm-hmm.
about like small petty things, and then you don't apologize, and you just
It's kind of
it just like festers. So it's like, this happened.
Yep.
It didn't land well. I don't know how. I don't even know how I feel about it, but I know it's not right. So
Mhm.
let's make this better together.
Okay.
I think that'll build good leadership no matter what.
Yeah.
And then you'll see how many doors will open for you just
Yep.
because you're listening to other people and you're
Uh-huh.
accountable yourself. Like,
Just showing up, right?
yeah, there's so many more doors that'll open than
Yeah.
kicking people down. So
Yeah. 100%. It's building people up, right, along
Yeah.
your journey. And again, to like leadership is, again, like a lot of things. It's a journey. There's not an end point, right? Like you said, it's a continuous process, working at it every day, getting a little bit better. And growing in that. Real quick, if you could share one piece of advice around leadership or leadership development with our audience, what would it be?
one piece of advice. Okay. Go to the Sarah Opperman Institute of Leadership, right? Is what the whole thing's called, Sarah Opperman Leadership Institute.
Yeah.
Go. They got
Well,
good nuggets.
thanks for the advice on that one. So real quick, one of our last parts of the show here, we call it our Mellow moments. We're going to bring out Mellow here in a second. So we ask our previous guests to ask our next guest, if they don't know who it is or the topic of the show, a question revolving around leadership. So we have that question. Mellow will present that to you. You'll have your answer. Don't worry, it stumps everyone. And then after that, I'll come back out and we get to ask you what you want to ask the next guest for the question. But you don't get to know who it is either, and it's all around leadership. So it's kind of just a fun segment on our show, the Mellow moment. So we'll have them come out and finish this up real quick, and then we'll end our show.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, Mello?
I'm doing pretty good, Yasas.
Do I get to know who was before?
Alfred.
Okay.
Yep. So Alfred said, as a leader or someone who is in a leadership role, what do you do for yourself to stay motivated, to keep going, and it's kind of a two-parter, and not respond with emotions when someone is speaking and trying to cause some form of conflict? So I guess they're separate questions, but he put it together. So, I mean, it's cool. I mean, I guess we can answer it separately or together.
So what do I do?
And I could say it again.
Say it
if you want.
again.
So the first part is, as a leader, what do you do to basically stay motivated and keep going?
I talked about this. This is a good question. I talked about this, the wins and loss column. Like, it might not work for everybody, but it really works for me. So it's a personal thing, but I struggle with depression and anxiety, and one of the things that comes with that is you really focus on the negative stuff, right?
Yeah.
You just really spiral with that, and I spiral a lot, and it's something that I'm working on myself in my mental health, and I need that wins and losses, because that loss column can look really big, but really the wins are the ones I want to focus on. So what I'll do is, I use Steve Jobs as an example a lot, but I don't idolize him. There's some stuff that is just like fantastic in.
He's one of my favorite people, honestly.
Right.
So.
Like, what was the reality before and what is it now? And so the win, and even the win and the loss column is like, what was the reality before and what was the win, right? And now, how does it look like?
Yeah.
And even the loss column, like, what was the reality before and why was it the loss? And like, what made that happen? One, that's a good reflection tool for me, because then I could just make it better. But two, is like, it can really just gives a little pep in my step. Like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
You know, I did that. That thing was really hard. And sometimes your staff, your students, your, you know, whoever you're leading doesn't always know the struggle you're going through as a
Right.
leader, right? Like, you're trying to protect them, you're trying to do that. And I try to be honest as possible, but
And you don't want to throw all that on them.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And, you know, they're already, it's trying to, like, be a good person to them. So I'm not trying to throw it on them. I think that's the perfect way you said that. So I'm holding on to this. But then I got to see the win column, like, I did that for them. They might not ever know that I did that for them, but man, their life is at least 5% better because I did it. They had no idea.
Right.
And it's not to throw it in their face or anything. It's like, hey, I really put effort into this because I saw this was important to you, or like it made our lives easier. So I need that to keep motivated, to help me through that spiral, and I encourage everyone who's feeling like they spiral a lot like me, to have, like, you know, a journal of that of wins, you know. And if you can separate that out by years, like sometimes I'll go back like a couple years of stuff I thought was super important to me, and I'm like, man, that was easy, you know, like, why was that such a hard thing? But at the time it was like the biggest challenge in the world, and now I look back, I'm like, man, I could have done that like so easy, like in 2 seconds, you know. So that's one way of motivating. But the other question was like how to keep
how to I guess how to not use your emotions when dealing with conflict with others. So, you know, because I mean, I struggle with that where I'm just like, I'm getting so into it where I'm like, dude, like.
This is something I struggle with, though. I'm not the best at this, but some of the stuff I said before about like being curious, but also being honest, like I'm frustrated. Like I'm coming at this at a level 10, and I don't know how I'm going to respond. So I might need a second.
Right.
I need a breather. This happens a lot. Like students, your parents are really amazing. Like they're getting, some of you and your supporters are really amazing getting through college, your support system, and they really care about you. So when something's going on, they call me. They're yelling at me, and I'm like, I didn't do anything, right? So they're taking their frustrations out of me, and so like I'm like, how?
You start to get triggered a little bit, like and you
what?
start to kind of give them that same energy, and
I'm like, what are you coming at me for? So I'm like, okay, they're not really trying to hurt me. They're upset because they're students upset. So I try to like, I need a breath, like, you know, sir, ma'am, other. I hear what you're saying. I just need a second to process this because there's a lot of information coming in here. So I'll tell them that, like, this is how I'm feeling. Just give me a second. I want to give you a good answer.
Right.
But I'm not there. I mean, and
they don't know how to handle it. So.
Exactly. And, you know, like, I'm not expecting them to be perfect either. But if it's with my friends, my peers, my staff, I'm like, I'll be honest, like, I'm frustrated. And frustration, usually it's not anger. But usually frustrated. And like, I'm angry. No. I'm frustrated. I can work through this.
I get frustrated too. Yeah.
I work through this, but it's not gonna be easy. So I need a second. I want to be there. Sometimes, like, taking a quick break, like a 5-second break. 5 minutes. Step outside. Let's take a lap and come back. The mood will change completely. So that's one thing I do. Or like, we're not having a good conversation right now. Let's bring it back the next meeting. And let's work through it then, or let's meet after the meeting and settle this out.
When everything is processed, you're cooled down. You know, you can really think it through. Yeah. Sometimes you just need that time. You know, to really, and even you saying that, it's like kind of like, wow, like I'm actually reflecting on it myself. Where those times where I've lashed out, knowing like. I mean, not necessarily that's not me, but because we're human, we have emotions. But, you know, you lash out and you're like, yo, like I just said something that I really didn't mean to someone. When if I would have just waited a few seconds and let it process, then I could have came back to them on a later time and actually explained how I really felt.
Yeah. I mean, it's hardwired into us.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we had to survive many years like that. And so biologically, we're like, someone's threatening me.
It's a natural reaction.
Right. Like, but really, we don't have real threats, you know, in life. So just take a second to calm down, like biological lizard brain, like slow down. Okay, I can work through this. I love that, like, that vulnerability. And, you know, part of it is like, as a man, like, I'm not supposed to get emotional because, like, this
according to society standards.
Right? And it's even worse for like women, right? People who present as women. But like as a man, like all my anger, like all my emotions are anger. That's what people think. So like when I'm like, I want to solve this problem in a in a calm way, and they're like, "Why are you so angry at me?" I'm like, "I'm not angry. I'm like, it might come out that way. I'm a larger dude. Like I tower over people sometimes. It's like that's what I want to do."
Right.
And then, like our friends who present female or other, like they can't have any emotions, and then people are like, "Man, they're so emotional. That's such a bad, like that sucks for them, right?" So
And
like,
all they did was just shed one tear.
right, not even not even that, dude.
Not
like,
even,
they
you
would
know.
be like, "I'm frustrated," and
Yeah.
so I really feel for them, right? Like, cause and so that connection with that empathy part, like I know meetings where or groups of friends will be like, "Yasas, you're so emotional." Like, no, I'm not. And then when my partner will say this a lot, like in that meeting, like they didn't even pay attention to me because they thought I was emotional. It's like, oh, that must really suck. Like, I'm sorry you went through that. Like, let's talk about it because that's frustrating for them. So like,
Right.
there's so many like internal things that we're trying to navigate. So my advice to all of you is that if you're, in that kind of situation where you're getting emotional, be honest with them. Like, I am feeling like this, and I'm this is where I'm at. And if you're in a good group, they'll be like, I understand. At any point, we can come back to this, or like, do you want to work through this right now? Like,
Right.
are you in a good space to do that? That's a good group to work with. If they're keeping pushing buttons, what you gotta do is like, I'm not gonna be able to have this good conversation. So if you
Right.
want me to be part of this conversation, can we talk like after? Like, can we set up another time? Because I'm not in a good place to talk about this right now. And if they give you crap about it, like, guess you're never part of the conversation in the first
Right.
place. So
Yeah.
so it's good to walk away and come back to it. But
Yeah.
if they're not willing to come back to it, that's on them. You can always invite them back, but it's okay to be emotional. Emotions are normal,
Yep.
and there's so many like societal expectations with that. It's all bullcrap.
Like emotions will make us human. So.
Exactly. And society tells us that we can and cannot have emotions, and that's not cool. I've found the best conversations, the best conflicts I've had is when I let with emotion, because I can show them like, this is why I care about it. And
The truest, purest form of you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then when they know why I made that decision, or like when they know more about me, they care about me. They're trying to solve the problem with me instead of like, I'm this big wall of leader. Like, that's not it. Be vulnerable, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, it was good to talk to you for this brief moment. I appreciate all the advice you gave. You definitely said something that I'm going to take away from, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, that was a great Mello moment. Thanks for coming out, Mello. Again, our CTO, our Chief Technology Officer, and
That was awesome.
and a producer on the show. We love those Mello moments. Well, now it's your turn to ask a question for our next guest, something to do with leadership or leadership development related.
Okay. I guess as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
what was the biggest win you've had as a leader?
As a leader, what has been the biggest win you've had?
Yeah.
Love that one. That's a great one. I think it connects to what we talked about today. So
Yeah.
kind of continuing that chain. I love that. Sweet. Well, hopefully we'll have to wait. Our audience will have to wait to see who answers it and what their answer is. But I'm excited to see what their response is. Real quick, Yasas, where can people find you? And do you have, I know you shared a couple resources which we can try and find and put in the description here, but is there any other resources that come to mind that we can maybe add to the description box or maybe even share?
Well, my biggest advice is to, like we said, search something, and your algorithm will take care of that for you. But definitely, there are a lot of good channels and stuff like that just go into why humans are the way they are. So be curious about the human experience.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be specifically like about you. Like, it could be something completely unrelated. I think that brings it brings me a lot of joy. I think it'll bring a lot of people joy just to learn more about how we are and be curious about it.
Okay.
YouTube is my best friend.
YouTube's your best friend. I love
my
YouTube
best
too.
friend. And honestly, like, there's so many good TV shows out here. I can't even remember off the top of my head, but yeah, be curious about it.
Be curious. Okay.
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yasas Vithanage. It's out there. I have a website. It's
That's dope.
yasasob.com. And then you can get through to my LinkedIn. Give me. I'll know that people went through. 'Cause
Yeah.
LinkedIn gives you
Yeah, they'll
someone
know.
looked at your profile.
We'll attach your LinkedIn profile then
yeah.
in the description too.
Yeah, I'm a photographer, so
Okay.
you can get me on Instagram at Hot Sauce Photography. So,
Hot Sauce Photography.
So-
DJ Hot Sauce.
yeah, so that's where I'm at. I'm not really at anywhere else. So, and you can find me if you're actually like trying to look at me on campus. My email is vitha1y@cmh.edu. I try to do this, but
I got you. We'll put that in the description too. Awesome, man. This went super well. Thank you again for being here, giving us your time today. It was great learning with you. Got a lot of new knowledge myself, so it was an awesome experience. Again, we really appreciate it. We know you're busy, so for coming out over here and you give us a couple hours of your time for today's episode.
Yeah, it was real therapeutic.
Yeah,
It was some
good.
things I was working through
Uh-huh.
myself. So
That's good. I would like to hear that. So, for the audience, that's all we have for you today on Lean Into Leadership. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll be right here, same time next week with another great episode. You're not going to want to miss it. And for now, keep leading the way. Peace.